Secondly, the Asian parliamentary structure, and lastly, speaker roles. So this is the general outline we'll be following for this first half. So we're going to start off with debate motions. On every debate motion, it's important that we notice rule as early as now. We have something that we call the Fiat rule. So what is the Fiat rule? The Fiat rule is essentially something that assumes that whatever we are discussing in the round is possible. So again, whatever we are discussing in the round should be considered as possible. What do I mean by this? I mean that if our motion is going to be this house would impose the death penalty, we will assume that we are able to impose the death penalty. If the motion is this house would replace the judicial system with artificial intelligence, we assume that we can replace the judicial system with the artificial intelligence. Why is this the case? This is the case because we cannot have a discussion unless we at the very least assume that the matter of hand that we are currently discussing is something that can happen. Why? For instance, let's say this motion was about the death penalty. So this House would implement the death penalty. Well, if opposition would argue that we cannot implement the death penalty, then this discussion essentially becomes meaningless. So we essentially therefore assume that the discussion can happen solely for the purpose that we are able to have that discussion in the first place. So we can assume, for instance, that we can replace the judicial system with artificial intelligence. If it's something as weird as this House would tax people based on their level of attractiveness, we assume that is something that we are capable of doing. Just to be clear, this doesn't mean necessarily that these things can happen automatically or that these things will happen efficiently or that these things will happen perfectly. So while you can't argue that it's impossible to happen, you could argue that it's an inefficient way of achieving the goal. You could argue that there are honestly better methods that exist. You could argue that it's incredibly difficult to do, requires too much resources, or is a waste of people's time. So you assume that things can happen, and that's essentially all that you assume. So in particular, there are three primary types. There are two primary types of motions. The first are policy motions, and the second are value judgment motions. How do we distinguish these? Policy motions, in particular, refer to motions that begin with "this House believes," "this House proposes," and "this House would." So what does a policy motion essentially do? Well, like the name implies, it means that we want to implement a policy. So there is something that we as a house want to essentially do. An example of this is this house would hunt down Batman. So this house would pursue the action of hunting down Batman. Similarly, it could be something this house would hunt down Batman. So what does that mean? In essence, what we're looking at in these policy debates is what exactly are the consequences of these actions. So let's say there's a goal that we want to achieve. This is the method through which we will try to achieve whatever that goal is. Now, an additional nuance that you can add upon these policy debates is the nuance of defining who the house is. For instance, you could say this house as the Joker would hunt down Batman, or this house as the police would hunt down Batman. Why is this important? It's important because the debate can change depending on who the actor it is that we're talking about. For instance, if we're talking about this house as the Joker would like to hunt down Batman, we would talk about what the interests of the Joker are and why it would be within his interest to pursue the action of hunting down Batman. Similarly, if we were talking about this debate in the context of the police, well, of course, the police has different interests from the Joker in the same way that the Joker may have different interests from the government. And those would all affect the reasons why they would want to hunt down Batman. And hence, that's why the debate changes depending on who exactly the actor is. So basically, just to reiterate, a policy motion proposes an action that we'll do, and that is what the debate is going to be about. Should we do that action? Should we not do that action? The next type of motion that we have are what we call value judgment motions. So these include this house supports, this house regrets, this house prefers. So if policy motions call for us to do something, a value judgment motion simply makes us ask the question of whether or not the matter at hand is good or bad. What do I mean by this? What I mean is, let's give an example. This house regrets Batman, Robin as Batman's sidekick. So for government, they're going to argue that historically it has been good. Sorry, for government, they will argue that historically it has been bad that Robin has been Batman's sidekick, whereas opposition will argue that in essence it has been a good thing that Robin has been Batman's sidekick. So in essence, in these value judgment debates, what you're going to ask yourself is it good or is it bad that this thing is happening? So that's in essence what it revolves around. It revolves around that particular principle. So again, just to summarize before I proceed to the next section, a policy motion asks what we should do. So a policy motion asks what we should do, and a value judgment motion asks us whether or not the thing is good or bad. What is the delineation between the two? Well, of course, in a policy motion, you're called to mechanize the policy. You ask yourself, is this efficient? Is this something we can do? You can propose a model by which you achieve a goal. Whereas coming in from opposition, whereas coming in from value judgment debates, what you're going to ask yourself is this a good thing? Is this a bad thing? So in essence, policy motions are forwards looking. They look at what we can change, what we can improve in the world that we live in. Whereas value judgment debates are retrospective. They look at what these things have done. They look at whether or not those things have been good and bad. So policy motions look forward, value judgment debates look backwards. The next thing we're going to discuss is something we call the veto system. So the way that topics are determined in an Asian parliamentary debate is that both teams are going to essentially decide on the topic that they want to be able to discuss. So in particular, the way that this works is teams are going to flag out, they're going to rank the motions from 1 to 3. So 1 being the motion that you want to do most, and 3 being the motion that you want to do the least. So what happens when you give a motion a 3? When you give a motion a 3, that means you will not use that motion. So that motion has been eliminated from the motions that we can discuss. So you can veto a motion, they can veto a motion, and whichever motion remains, that is going to be the motion that you use. So if they veto motion 1, if you veto motion 3, then you will end up using motion 2. So why then do the 1 and the 2 exist? The 1 and the 2 exist in the instances, for instance, that both of them veto the same motion. So let's say both houses decided to veto motion 1. Then you would essentially be tossing up between motions 2 and motions 3. If both of them agree that they wanted to put motion 2 as number 1, Eddie will go with motion 1. But then, for instance, in the case that it's 1, 2, 2, 1, so for instance, one side prioritizes motion 2, the other side prioritizes motion 3, even though both of them have vetoed motion 1, then it's going to be decided by a coin toss. So again, any motion that gets the 3 will be removed. It's out of the discussion. Whichever motion has the most number of ones will be prioritized, and if it ends up being a tie, you will flip a coin. So, sorry, the adjudicator will flip a coin. That's how we ensure fairness. Next thing we're going to discuss is the speaker roles in Asian parliamentary format. So the way that it works is we go back and forth from government to opposition. So we go from prime minister to leader of opposition to deputy prime minister to deputy leader of opposition to government whip to opposition whip to reply speaker and then towards the end, what's going to happen is the speaker roles will change. So what this means is opposition will go first, opposition will give the first of the 2 reply speeches, and then government on the other side is going to be the one to give the last reply speech. So before I go into what exactly each of these speaker roles mean, in essence, what the reason why does the reply speaker why the reply speakers change towards the end is because of course opposition has an advantage throughout the debate of being able to respond to government. So towards the end, we kind of flip that by allowing the government to have a better chance of doing that. Anyways, in general do we analyze each of these roles? Well, broadly speaking, each of the speakers has to do 2 things. So first, for the first speakers, or the leader of opposition and the prime minister, they have 2 fundamental responsibilities. First is characterization. They need to point out to us, for instance, what what is the problem that we face in this debate, what is the policy that we're going to use, what is the solution, and they're going to give us the preliminary arguments that their house is going to use in the duration of the round. So a way that you can think of the first speakers is sort of as the introduction in an essay. They give us the context, they give us the scope and limitations, they give us the research model, and they give us the fundamental premises to the arguments that we are going to use. This applies to both government side and to opposition side. There's a slight nuance, however, when you are on opposition, which is that you will also have the responsibility of doing the surface level responses or pointing out what we call is a clash. So basically, if government is going to say, this is why we want to do something for XYZ reasons, then leader of op will come in and say, we do not want to do this because we disagree with this context. We have our own alternative model and we believe that's going to be better. So that's what the burden of the first speaker is. They introduce us into the world of the rounds and they start off that initial clash between the speakers. The second speakers you can think of as sort of being the main body of the essay, in the sense that the second speakers only have the responsibility of responding and extending upon the arguments given to us by the first speakers. So what are they going to do? They're going to tell us, okay, opposition was wrong for XYZ reasons. They're going to say government was wrong for XYZ reasons. And here are the other additional reasons why we are correct. We will get more into this when we get to the latter half of this thing. But in essence, you can think of the second speakers as being the people that will broaden the scope of this debate. They will give us the most important reasons and they'll give us the most important responses. Because between the second speakers, that's where the most amount of content solely based on argumentation will be. And lastly, for the third speakers, you can think of the third speakers as like a bit of a conclusion in the essay. So what is their responsibility? Well, first, they're going to give the final responses in the debate. So both of these speakers are the last speakers. That means that they have the burden of being able to respond to all the speakers that were before them. So if there are any loose ends, you want to close them with your third speakers. So government and opposition whip, you want to close off any remaining lines. That is to say that if there's anything that was not responded to, if there are arguments which are still standing, it is the burden of the third speaker to close all of those like tight ends. And secondly, just like when you think about an essay, their job is to sort of conclude and to wrap up the debate. And in the same way that when you make a conclusion, what you do is you organize all of the previous thoughts and you analyze their implications. That is exactly what you do when you are one of the whips as well. That is to say that you will. Some people like to use the word summarize. I personally don't like the word summarize. You are going to organize the previous point. We're going to say this debate has talked about the clash between economic interest and moral principles. This debate has talked about this, it has talked about that. And they are going to compare and they're going to weigh who essentially did a better job in discussing each of those issues. Of course, this is supposed to be biased towards your side. That is to say that as third speaker, your job is going to be basically wrapping up the debate in a way that's really organized and really synthesized to really prove and to really solidify why the arguments you gave were better than the arguments that the other side gave. The third speaker is also not allowed to make arguments. If an argument comes in from third speaker, it will not be credited. Why will it not be credited? The logic behind this is that the third speakers have no one who can respond to them after they make the arguments. So in the interest of fairness, because at the core of these debates is having a fair discussion, um, because at the core of these debates is having a fair discussion. Both of the third speakers are not allowed to raise any additional arguments. They're only allowed to weigh, they're allowed to respond, they're allowed to analyze. So those are the things that they are in particular allowed to do. What is an example of, for instance, analyzing? You can choose to compare the arguments that were presented. You can choose to weigh the values that the argument showed and say why your value is better than their value. And you can choose to organize the debate in a way that essentially makes your side look better. So it's a matter of controlling perception. Again, your job here is to resolve any loose ends, to tie up any deadlocks, or any remaining arguments that you thought were unresponded to. So before I continue, what are the reply speakers going to do then? The job of the reply speakers, there's no strict format for what a reply speaker is supposed to do. But in general, what you expect the reply speaker to do is you expect the reply speaker to be a sort of you expect the reply speaker to be you expect the reply speaker to sort of be like a criticism of the round. So if the first three speakers are like the body of the essay, what the reply speeches are, it's going to be like a criticism. It's going to be like an abstract. So what they're going to do is they're going to say that. So to conclude, so to ultimately conclude, this round was flawed for XYZ reasons, and this is exactly why our side won because their side wasn't able to point out all of these things. Again, there's no strict format for how you should do this, but what you're supposed to do is you're supposed to evaluate the round and use that to prove why exactly it is your side ended up winning. So in terms of timing, what do these look like? For each of the first three speakers, they have 7 minutes to speak. So you will have 7 minutes from your first argument to your third argument, from your first level of analysis to your last level of analysis. You will have 7 minutes to go over that. Why is it that all speakers have this same 7 minutes? The logic is so that no one is going to drown out the discussion. By giving people the same amount of time, you are ensuring that things are fair insofar as they all have the same amount of time to allocate for the analyses that they're going to use. So, in the interest of fairness, everyone only gets the 7 minutes. At most, you can extend to about 7 minutes and 30 seconds. But beyond that point, adjudicators will no longer take notes, and anything you say past that mark will not be credited to your speeches. Again, we will not be credited to your speeches. For reply speeches, you will have 4 minutes to be able to give those. Again, strictly speaking, you cannot go outside of that time, general time frame for the same reasons. Lastly, upon the release of the motion, you will have 30 minutes to both prepare and do your veto. So this is to say that time that you waste trying to veto motions is time you're taking away from your ability to prepare for the debate. Later on, I think tomorrow morning, Miggy will discuss how this veto process will happen. But basically, you want to veto as quickly as possible to decide what the topic is so that you'll be able to maximize your preparation time because these both happen within the same period of time. The next thing we're going to talk about is
Before
points
we
of
continue,
information.
Scott.
Because, apologies, Mickey.
Before we continue, just to clarify for the time, as we did market this as a beginner's level debate, we will be accepting only a minimum of 5 minute speeches and nowhere below that. Because as standard in most, I guess you could say not necessarily beginner level debates, you will see all speeches reaching at least up to 7 minutes. So just to clarify, we're allowing a minimum of 5 minute speeches, but it's obviously best to maximize that time.
Okay, thanks for that, Miggy. To continue, so what are points of information? Points of information are questions that you can ask to the opposing team. Because, of course, part of this debate, of course, it's engagement, it's being able to question the other side. And, okay, sorry, I forgot to put the thing, but basically, a point of information is a question that you can ask the other side. And these points of information can occur anywhere between the first minute and the 6th minute. So your first minute, that's protected time. They cannot ask points of information there. In your 6th minute, they also can't ask points of information there. It is only between the first and the 6th minute that people are allowed to ask these questions. Why is this important to note? Oh, sorry. Before that, also you have the right on whether or not you want to accept or deny these points of information. If you don't want to accept the points of information, you can choose to reject it. If you have a point of information, of course, you type it out on in the text channel of the respective room that you are currently in. Again, the speaker can choose whether to accept it, whether to deny it. Personally, I would encourage you to accept at least one POI within your speeches. The logic being that engagement engaging with the opponent is the core of this debate. And if you cannot engage with your opponent, then of course that isn't going to make you look very good or look very strong in the round. So try to raise one POI against every speaker and try to accept one POI per speaker. The logic again being that you want to engage with your opponent as best as you can. So in essence, that's going to be it for our first part concerning the structure of the Asian parliamentary in and of itself. Before I continue, I'd like to ask if anyone has any questions regarding the format or if that was all reasonably clear. If it wasn't clear, don't worry. Of course, we'll first be forwarding this PowerPoint to you guys, so we'll make it open access here in the Discord server. And of course, secondly, we'll be uploading additional materials which cover these speaker roles as well. You can find plenty of them on the internet should you have any questions about them. But again, before we continue, does anyone have any questions regarding the first part on the structure of these debates?
Francis. Just going to clarify, it's not we're not enforcing a mandatory POI rule, right?
Wait, I'll raise this question to Ajkor, at the end.
So you're not um, going to enforce the mandatory POI.
Yeah, so there you go. Okay, do we have any other questions? Going once, going twice.
Excuse me po.
Hello po.
Can we ask a more clear differentiation of um, government or just the whips and the speakers?
Okay, thank you for that. So, the difference between the whips and the reply speakers is the perspective they take within the debate. So both of the whip speakers are essentially people that view the round inside the round, whereas the two reply speakers view the round outside of the round. What does that mean? It means that, like what I was saying a while ago, the two whips should think of themselves as being conclusions, whereas the two reply speakers should think of themselves as evaluations. So the job of the whips are to resolve any issues that were happening in the round. So if the debate was about a discussion on something like poverty, then their job is to prove why they were able to better address poverty on their side. If the debate was a discussion on let's say gender rights, it's going to be why they were able to best protect the interest of women, for instance, on their side. Now, what is the reply speaker going to do? The reply speaker is an evaluation. So they look at the debate and they're going to say, these are the things that were missing. These were the logical flaws committed by the opposing side. They're going to evaluate the reasoning that was used. So you can sort of think of it like a bit of a criticism. So it's going to be like, here are some general comments on why the other side can't take it over us because they did all of these technical things very bad. Their arguments were poorly structured. They failed to address the core problem of the debate, and the arguments that they had weren't relevant. That's what essentially a reply speaker will go for. They'll go for a technical evaluation of what the debate was, what was missing, and that's how they're going to prove that their team basically won. So it's like you're judging the round, but judging it in a way that's biased to your side, if that makes any sense.
Hello, Sir Scott.
Hello.
Sorry. May I ask a clarification, sir?
Sure, no problem.
Okay, regarding the point of information, um, when the opposition or the government side is going to ask, who is going to ask essentially? For example, the government speaker is the one who's speaking. Is it going to be the opposition who will ask for the point of information in the first minute and 6 minutes of the speech, or is it going to be the one who's speaking?
Oh, sorry. Just to clarify, POIs will be raised. POIs will be raised from the people who are not speaking. So let's say, for instance, I am the speaker right now. If you are not, if you are on the opposite team, while I am speaking, I say something that you want to question. You can raise a POI. So basically, it's the opposing team that is currently not speaking that can raise the POIs, and it is the speaker who is currently speaking who has to answer. So, for instance, if me and Miggy were debating, since Miggy's the one not talking right now, Miggy can raise POIs to me, and I can choose whether to accept or to deny. Similarly, if Miggy was the one talking right now, I could ask POIs to Miggy, if that makes sense.
And Scott, this is going to be typed in the chat box, right? Correct. Or they are going to raise it by unmuting their mic, something like that.
Okay. Well, I think it's up to the discretion of the speakers how they choose to accept or reject their POIs. We'll be going over this in the briefing tomorrow. So if you want to accept POIs via chat, or if you want to accept POIs via audio, you can state it before your speech. So you can say, I would like to accept my POIs via chat. I'll be looking at it, don't worry. Or I would like to accept POIs by unmuting because I won't be looking at the chat. So you can choose how it is you want to accept it.
Yeah, just to
Yeah.
further clarify that, the POI itself will be verbal. You can't like send the POI as a message on the text channel. So the content will be verbal, but the manner of accepting can be verbal or through text.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your question. Does anyone else have any other questions regarding structure before we continue? Okay. Going once, going twice, going.
Sir,
Yes.
may I ask about the point of information? Is it during first and sixth minute or between first and sixth minute?
Between first and sixth minute. Between first and sixth minute. So in the
Okay,
first minute, no questions. In the last minute, no questions. Okay.
oh, hello.
So meaning,
Okay, I think there were two questions coming in. I think one was coming from the November Ice person. November Ice, if you could give your question first, and then we can go to the next person after.
Ano yun?
Okay po.
Pakibalik doon.
What are like the fixes po if there are connectivity issues or like someone got disconnected accidentally or something like that?
Okay, so we'll be going over that in the technical briefing tomorrow. But just to give a very brief overview now, of course, if someone disconnects in the middle of their speech, the timer will be paused, and we will wait a certain period of time for the speaker to be able to reconnect. Assuming that the speaker is unable to reconnect, we will get another person, another one of the person's teammates will give the speech in their place. So that's something that we call Iron Manning a debate. So if one of your speakers gets disconnected and is unable to join for a certain period of time, he or she can be replaced by, of course, another. He or she can be replaced by one of his or her other teammates. Similarly, if people get Actually, yeah. Similarly, if the judge gets disconnected, for instance, then of course the debate will be paused until the judge is able to return, or unless the judge is able to be substituted by another judge, assuming that we aren't too far, assuming that the round itself, for instance, hasn't started. So I hope that answers that question. We'll again get in more into this tomorrow morning.
Thank you.
Okay. There was another person who had a question. If that person could kindly unmute again and raise it.
Sir Scott, just the clarification of I think Miss Pau, uh, meaning to say the POI will be asked between the first and sixth minute. Does that mean uh, does that mean the speaker will have to answer it right away, or they can answer that right after their speeches? I mean, they could, right? They could answer the POI after their
Um, Okay. First and foremost, all POIs that are made, they need to be answered, for instance, directly after the question is raised. So, for instance, if I accept the POI from Miggy and Miggy asks me, but what do you think about poverty? Then I have to say that, well, in the context of this motion, what I think about poverty is this. Or what I can tell Miggy is, I will get to that later on in my speech, and then I'll answer it when I get to that latter part of the speech. To be clear, POIs are not an excuse to go outside of the 7 minute restriction. So even if the POIs are given, you still need to answer them within that 7 minute time frame. So I hope that answers that question.
All right. Thank you very much, Sir Scott.
No problem. Does anyone else have any other questions before we continue?
Hello po.
Hi po.
I'm just going to ask regarding with the POI. How do we notify a current speaker po if you want to raise a POI po? Is it through chat or verbal?
Again, I just like to reiterate, you can ask, you as the speaker can indicate where they want to receive it. So before you begin your speeches, you can say, I would prefer POIs by the chat, or I would prefer POIs by unmuting. And again, you can choose whether to accept, whether to deny. So how do you indicate you want to raise a POI? Type POI. When you type in POI, the speaker can therefore say, okay, I accept the POI. Sorry, I think I'm echoing from someone. Okay, yeah. So the speaker can say, I accept the POI, I deny the POI. And then, of course, if he accepts the POI, then that is the point at which you can unmute yourself and ask what the POI is. But the signaling, subject, sorry, again, someone echoed. Anyways, but again, the signaling is subject to the discretion of the person speaking. If the person doesn't indicate a preference, then feel free to do it either way. But in general, I would ask before their preference before they give their speeches so that it's organized.
Okay po, thank you po.
For that, there's also a template that's going to be posted in the. Anyway, so yeah, there's a text template to be posted by the participants before the round starts, so you can refer back to that and check what is the POI preference of the speaker. So whether it's through verbal or through the text chat.
Yeah. So again, at least with the technical details of how things will happen, we'll go over that tomorrow again when we do our technical briefing. With that said, does anyone else have any more questions in terms of structure before we proceed into the second part concerning implementation? Also, again, I think I'm anyway. Okay, going once, going twice. Okay. Wait, sorry. If the person I'm echoing off of could kindly mute them. There you go. Thank you. Anyways, now since I think there are no further questions, we can proceed into part two, which is going to be on the more concrete skill of argumentation. So broadly speaking, there are two types of arguments that you can raise in a debate. First are principled arguments, and secondly are pragmatic arguments. So first, a principled argument is essentially an argument made from a principle of moral or social justice. What that means is a principled argument asks us whether or not a thing is morally good or morally bad. For instance, a principled argument would be something like something like murder is immoral, therefore the state cannot use it. Or it could be something like taxation is used for this, therefore you cannot use it for that. So a principled argument is an argument made from morality or made from justice. It asks you to question whether or not the thing is good, whether or not the thing is bad. So in the principled arguments, you look at what you ask yourself is, why is it morally justified for us to do? So basically, a principled argument, it asks yourself whether or not it is a moral thing for you to do. The second type of argument is a pragmatic argument. So these are arguments made from the standpoint of a practical benefit. What that means is a pragmatic argument is the reason why something is effective. So it's going to be something like taxation is effective because it does this, or murder can in certain instances be effective because it does that. So a principled argument again covers the morality, whether the thing is good or whether the thing is bad. A pragmatic argument covers the practicality of it. Is it effective or is it ineffective? So that's the framework we're going to be using for this next section. So first, regarding the structure of a principled argument. So a principled argument deals with the very simple question of why is this something we are morally justified in doing? In particular, there are four areas of consideration. First, what are the standards for when this action is deemed just? So, when in, for instance, the broad scope of human history or politics or the law, um, where do we see that we are justified in doing the action at hand? Don't worry, I'll give an example later on. The second question you ask is, when are the specific instances that we are willing to do this action? Because if the principle exists, then obviously there is proof that the principle exists. You can find this in the law, you can find this in the news, you can find it in previous historical events where we have shown that this principle is something worth fighting for. The third thing that you examine is the reason why. Why is it that these standards are justified in these instances? What is the underlying reason that this thing is essentially moral? And the last question that we ask ourselves is, how does this tie back? How does this apply to the discussion that we are having at hand? So an example of using this general structure is here. Let's say the motion is something like this house would torture terrorists. So the first question that we are going to ask ourselves is, what is the standard? So the standard, for instance, might be violence is something which is only unjust when done meaninglessly. So our standard for torture is that violence is something that is only unjust when it is done meaninglessly. Um, in what instances do we see this case applied? Well, we see it applied, for instance, when violence, which is done, for instance, to protect oneself or to protect one's family or to protect any other cause, like their property, for instance, that is justified as self-defense against another injustice which may harm him. So this is the proof that the principle is true. So in essence, if our principle is violence is unjust when it is done for no reason, when you just do it so that you can hurt someone, our proof is that self-defense is violence that we condone when it is done to protect yourself from another injustice which may harm you. So why is this the case? This is the case because the dignity of another person does not outweigh your own dignity, as the value of, for instance, the terrorist's life isn't going to be greater than your own. This is to say that if all people are equal, then of course that person is no important than me as a person. How does this tie back to the debate? Well, it ties back because this is the same principle with terrorists. Terrorists present a dangerous threat to society. Hence, even though we can concede that the terrorist has some dignity, we don't believe that his dignity outweighs the importance of the lives of all of the people that he may harm. So this is an example of, again, using a principle to prove that this is why we think it's morally justified. To be clear again, in this debate, you do not necessarily have to state your own opinions. For instance, I'm not necessarily saying that I believe that we should torture terrorists. What I'm saying is this is a reason why we could consider torturing terrorists, given that this is the motion and the side that we have. So in these debates, you assume the side that you are essentially given, and you create reasons. These don't necessarily have to be things you believe in, but they, of course, should be things that essentially make sense. So that is, again, in essence, an example of what a principled argumentation would look like. If you need solid examples of some of the principles you can use things like consequentialism, or in essence that the principle justification is that we are better with this policy than without this policy. You can use contractualism, which states that in essence it is justified because this enables people to act or live in a more organized society. Third, you could use something like Kantism, which is to say that You question the precedent that this type of principle would set. And lastly, you could use something like postmodernism or stating that you need to equate for inequalities. To be clear, these aren't strict principles. These aren't the only principles that exist. There are hundreds, if not thousands, of principles from law, from politics to human rights that all exist, and these are all fair standards that we can use in constructing our principled arguments. So the second thing we're going to go to is into the structure of a pragmatic argument. So again, it deals with a simple question of what is the benefit of doing this action. Similar to the principled arguments, it has four areas of consideration. First, what is the problem or need that this solution addresses? Because simply put, if there is no problem, why do we need to do the thing, right? Of course, it has to answer some problem, some concern that we have, and that's why that's the first question you ask. What is the problem that this is going to address? The second question you're going to ask yourself is, how is the solution that we are proposing, how does this solution address it? What is the mechanism towards solving the problem that you raised, right? So what is our solution? How does it fix the problem? Mechanize to us, tell us, okay, so we're going to implement this policy and it will fix this problem. That's why it's good. The third thing you're going to ask yourself again is the proof that the thing works. Where is the evidence that suggests that this policy is something that really fixes the problem? In the broad scope of human history, there are many events that have happened. And essentially, it's an area of consideration to ask yourself, where is the proof that the thing works? And lastly, you tie it back to the round again by proving that this benefit is something good, that this benefit is something that we want to be able to achieve. So, oh, where did the example go? Okay, my apologies. I'm not sure where the example of a pragmatic argument went. I think I can just make an example off the top of my head. I'll return.
Scott,
Yes, maybe.
is the example this house would tax the attractive and redistribute wealth to the ugly?
Does it have the arguments under it highlighted in this manner? If not, then no.
No, it does not.
Okay. Wait. Kindly give me a second. I'll just add the slide to the PowerPoint, or alternatively, I can do it off the top of my head. But I feel like it would be harder to follow if that was the case. So kindly just give me a second. It won't take much time. Maybe it should mirror on your end since we're sharing off of a G
Yep.
slide. Okay. Okay, my apologies again. I've re-added the slide. So for instance, let's say the motion is this house would decrease minimum wage. So we start with the problem. What's the problem? As a result of the global pandemic, unemployment has nearly doubled, leaving millions of workers with no means to live. And this is because businesses cannot afford to pay salaries in current economic conditions. So this is the problem that we want to address. So what is our solution? Our solution is that by decreasing minimum wage, we are able to resolve this issue by loosening the economy, hence enabling more businesses to employ more workers at a lower cost. Where is the evidence that this works? Well, this is a policy that has been often adopted by developing countries such as China to be able to rapidly spur economic growth and production to maximize the labor force in their population and reduce unemployment. And this is good because while we understand, for instance, that it obviously isn't good that we underpay people, of course, it is better that people are going to be employed than, of course, people not being employed. In essence, a low salary is better than no salary at all. So a pragmatic argument, again, simply seeks to prove that this is the effect and it is an effect that we want. So that is what a pragmatic argument covers. Two other things that we're going to get to, extensions and preemptions. So what is an extension? Well, an extension is in essence what the second speakers are going to do. They're going to expand the scope of the debate and they're going to fill in, I guess, missing perspectives. And secondly, of course, preemption which is to prevent certain arguments that may be raised. So, why are preemptions useful? So basically, a preemption is in essence you rebutting the opponent before they even raise the case. And it's important because, of course, the opposing team looks very dumb and is placed in a very difficult position if you can respond to certain points before they are raised. So the step in preempting a case coming in from your opponent is to think about the obvious case that they are going to run and rebutting it even before they raise it. For instance, an example. Let's say our discussion is this house will impose the death penalty. You already know that opposition is going to raise an argument along the lines of the death penalty is a violation of human life. And you can find already ways around that. You can say, now, before opposition raises the whole case that this is a violation of human life, we would argue that the criminals who we are imposing this penalty upon have already violated the lives of others, and hence this are no longer as deserving of that same dignity. For instance, if you steal from another person, we send you to jail, we take away your freedom. So we think that if you kill someone, if you take away the lives of others, then in essence you have lost the right to your own life. Again, I'm not saying that this is something that I believe in. I'm simply using this to illustrate the example. So a preemption is asking yourself, what are they going to do? How can I rebut it now? That way, for instance, when the other side does raise it, they're going to look kind of dumb insofar as you already ended up responding to it. In particular, I would argue that preemptions are very good for the two opening speakers to use because they can block off the speakers after them if it's used very strategically. Secondly, extension. So what is an extension? So basically, in order to move the debate forward, you cannot keep repeating the same arguments. It is good, for instance, that the first speaker and second speaker have different arguments such that the debate's able to move forward. Why? Because simply put, the judge is taking note of all the arguments. So if you say an argument twice, the judge isn't learning anything new. He's not getting any additional content out of it. So rather than repeating an argument, you want to make a new one. So how do you do that? Well, in essence, you can do several things. You can question assumptions. You can think about new actors. You can think about other problems. You can think about other cases. You can question whether or not certain things are true in this debate. You can think about who is important that we aren't discussing. You can say this is another problem that we need to consider, or you can say that this may be the case in these cases, but there are several other cases that we also need to consider. A general step towards this, and I think this is what makes an effective extension, try to think about again the case that the other side is going to run and try to steal what their benefit is. So if their benefit is human dignity, think about how you can take that. If their benefit is economic efficiency, think about how you can take that on your side. Because in essence, a good extension is one that properly engages your opponent. Because again, discourse is premised on interacting with the other side. So if you're able to interact well, if you're able to take certain benefits that they have, then of course that's going to be a good thing that will be your side will basically be rewarded for. So for instance, let's say our motion, this motion has a bit of information. Some motions are like that. They have information slides or context that precede the motion. So for instance, let's say the motion is Rebel X is a Russian traitor who leaked information out of Russia to the United States and is currently undergoing trial. So the motion reads that this House, as Putin, would not sentence Rebel X to prison. So as government, I already know that opposition is going to argue that Putin should send the rebel to prison. Putin should send the person to prison in order to continue invoking the fear and justice that he has in Russia. So if he wants to invoke fear and justice, then of course he wants to send the guy to prison to prove that he is still the biggest dog in Russia. But in the converse, if I'm coming in from government and I know they're going to run that, I can try to co-opt that as early as now. I can say that, okay, but if we really want to show fear and justice, what are we going to do? What we're going to do is we will not sentence Rebel X to prison. We will let Rebel X pass his trial. And even in that scenario, we will still impose fear and justice. How? Because Putin still controls things like the mob. he still controls things like he still controls all of these other factors in Russia. He controls things like jobs, he controls things like the economy, and these are all things that he can use to essentially silence off Rebel X, even assuming that he wins the trial. And why does this invoke even more fear? Because it proves that in Russia, Putin is in control, and that even assuming you manage to escape out of justice, there is no way that you can escape the wrath of Putin. And that is what is in Putin's interest, is throwing his control over basically all of Russia. So broadly speaking, so yeah, broadly speaking, that's most of the material that we're going to be covering in the workshop today, at least that we're going to be covering directly from this PowerPoint. So before anything else, I'd like to ask before I proceed on to some last general notes, if anyone has any questions that they would like to raise, at least concerning what I just discussed on argumentation.
Hello, hello.
Hello?
Yes, sir. Can I ask? For this is for technicality. Sorry to ask. It just came just now.
Sure, go ahead.
If we would ask for POI and the speaker would prefer it through chat only, is the POI going to be the question will go to be in the form of a chat, or will the opposing team that raises the POI would open their mic and state the POI?
Once the POI is accepted, it should be given through voice. So regardless of the means that they use to accept it, if they accept the POI they see in the chat, if they accept the POI that is given through microphone, either way, the question itself should be raised auditorily. So for those of you who can see, for instance, let's say the convening text right now, for instance, I can type POI there. I can keep typing POI. So if you can see me, I'm typing POI there. And then Miggy can say, I reject that POI. Or if Miggy says he accepts that POI, then I unmute myself and I can give it. So I hope that's clear.
Yeah, that's clear. Thank you.
Thank you as well.
Hi, Sir Scott. May I just have
Hello.
a question about the one that you just talked about just a while ago. So I'm just curious, how do we determine uh, who gets to be the affirmative and the negative side when it comes to government and opposition? So it seems like the topics are uh, stipulated in a neutral manner. No, and then I'm curious, how do you know? How do we know whether we're supposed to be the one supporting and the one who's not supporting? Because there are examples that you've given that the government does not support the given topic, and then seems like the opposition supports the positive area of the topic, something like that. I'm just curious, who gets to determine that?
Okay. So who's government and who is opposition? So the one in favor, the one against. That is determined before the round begins. So you will be assigned whether you are government, whether you are opposition, and then after that, that is when the veto is going to happen. So for instance, let's say wait, sorry, I'm just returning flower. So for instance, let's say you see that you are government and these are the motions you have. So basically you think and ask yourself, as government, which motion would I want to do? That's what I'll put as one. As government, which motion would I not want to do? That's going to be three. Similarly, if you're on opposition, same thing, right? Which motion would I want to be against? Which motion would I want to be against the most? Which motion would I want to be against the least? And that's how you do your ranking for one, two, three, which one you want most, which one you want least. It depends, of course, on the side that you have and how that affects the way you argue. So I hope that's clear.
But sir, the motions are framed in say for example, the one that you said a while ago, about the guy who gets to be imprisoned or not, right? Something like that. And then in the motions are framed in a way that there is already how do I say this? It's already framed on either a positive note or a negative note. It's not something that is neutrally stated. What? Yeah, something like that.
Okay.
So the motions, it's framed on either a positive or a negative frame, rather than being framed as a neutral topic. When it's given to us, I'm not sure if you get my point, but
Can I
it's just
clarify, Scott?
uh,
To clarify, are you asking if the motion would be either gov leaning or op leaning? Is that what you mean?
yeah, something like that. Yes.
Okay. There, Scott. If it's either gov leaning or op leaning,
Okay.
and it's not neutral.
I think I'll cover this in maybe two ways because I think you're referring to. I think first and foremost, you're saying that, for instance, some of the things are like this house regrets, this house supports, this house would do, this house would not do. So these motions are crafted by the adjudication court. So we have three of them. You can check our publication materials if you want to check their credentials. And generally speaking, of course, whether you are affirmative, whether you are negative, it just simply means to say that you support what is going to be done or you are against what is going to be done. So if the thing is on against and you are on affirmative, then you are just going to end up being, yeah, if it's, yeah, you essentially just follow what the motion dictates if you are on government and you go against it if you are on opposition. Why is it that these things end up being neutrally stated anyways? It's because you're going to go through both perspectives anyways, right? You're going to go through the people who are in favor, you're going to go through the people who are against, and that kind of ends up balancing out. On the second note, which I think Mickey added, um, basically, some of these motions are actually going to be leaning towards a particular side. In Asians, we will have one motion which is often leaning towards op, we will have one motion leaning towards gov, and we will have one motion which is actually neutral. And part of the competition, part of what makes this difficult, is it is your job as debaters to determine which topic is going to be most arguable, at least for your side. So I hope that also clarifies things.
All right, Sir Scott. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for asking all the questions you've been asking as well. Does anyone else have any other questions before we continue with some general advice? Going once, going.
Hello.
Hello.
I'd like to ask a question po. What if in kapag nag-start na po yung competition, would there be any consideration for those who are speaking and like may problems sa internet connectivity po?
Again, yes, there will be. So again, there will be, if you, for instance, are speaking and then you get disconnected, a certain time will be given. This will be again gone over tomorrow. There will be a time given by which you should return, and then if you can't return, another speaker can give the speech in your place. So yeah,
Thank you.
okay. If there are any further questions, going once, going twice, going three times, going four times.
Hello.
Okay. Oh, hello po.
Hello. Yes, good evening. Tanong ko lang po, what if there's suddenly nagkaroon ng power failure, brownout sa area namin?
Okay, I think that's a bit more of a complicated question. I don't think that's at least not within the scope of this particular workshop. I think for instances like that, we will have to go to the technical briefing, which again will happen tomorrow. But assuming that such instance were to happen, I think the procedure there would be kindly contact the organizing committee, and of course, we'll see what we can do about it in the instance that it does end up happening.
Okay, sige po. Thank you po.
Thank you, po. Okay. Any further questions before I go into general other comments that are going to be useful?
Sir,
Hello po. Hi.
I would just like to suggest something regarding po dun sa question kanina ng isang speaker na what if nag-brown out. It's okay po ba na one of his our members through call na lang po yung pag-deliver po ng speech?
I think the concern there is just that there are several people in the debate, and there's no way we can ensure that everyone would be able to hear. Assuming that one person was disconnected, what you could do is, I guess, you could have the person call in and you could have another person put it against their microphone, assuming that everyone can hear it. But again, we'll be going over that in the technical briefing tomorrow. What our discussion about mostly today is about on the mechanics and on the structure of the debate in and of itself. So does anyone else have any other questions? Going once, going twice, going three times. Okay. So if there are no further questions regarding that, wait, I'll just stop sharing my screen now. And I'll just say some general things which I think are useful to think about in these debates. In particular, I'm going to be sharing my personal experience. Most of these are simply objective things. What I'm going to go into now are just things that I personally think have helped me as a debater. So three general things I will say. First is that one of the most important things that many people fail to consider in these debates is that it's very important that the way you speak is very logical and very clearly structured. That is to say that, for instance, if we're debating on something, it's good that you have, for instance, a clear introduction, a clear set of arguments you want to raise, and like a very clear, for instance, conclusion. So you want people to know what it is you are doing when you are doing it. In essence, you want the structure of your speech to be clear. What do I mean by that? I mean, for instance, I'm going to say, there are three arguments that I have that I'm going to use in this round. First is the argument on this, second is the argument on that, third is the argument on that. Why is it important that you do this? Because the judge is someone who's taking notes of the things that you say. And when you give them a guide, when you let them see the structure of your speech, they can essentially make their notes, they can make it cleaner, they can make it more organized, and that will help them understand your points. So if you're going to be responding, say, my first response to opposition is this. My second response to opposition is that. And my points are going to be, this is my first point, that's my second point, this is my third point. And the reason that it's very effective is because it clearly flags out to the person listening that this is what I'm currently discussing. And it lets them take down note of what it is you are talking about. Second general thing that I think everyone should always consider is that these debates always occur, we always assume that they occur in the real world. And that means that in these rounds, you should always remember that we're talking about real people, we're talking about real events, and we're talking about things, essentially real problems that we want to be able to solve. So what that means is always ask yourself, what does this mean for the average person? If we're talking about death penalty, what is that going to mean for the lives of victims? If we're talking about discrimination, what is it going to mean for those in the minority? In essence, you always need to think about those small people who are on the ground. And I think the last general tip I give before I hand this over to Mickey, who will give some last technical reminders and a bit of a technical briefing on how the debate platform itself works. Um, I think the last general thing to consider is that no matter whether you win or whether you lose, What's important is that from every round, you are able to learn, because so long as you learn from every round and so long as you make sure that you do better as each thing proceeds, that is how you essentially become a good debater. No one's a good debater when they start. No one is going to be perfectly logically clear. No one's going to have the world's greatest arguments. The way that you get there is off of practice. And it happens one step at a time, one round at a time. So with every round, just make sure that you do better, make sure that you think clearer, and make sure that you express things better than you previously did. With that said, that's going to be it for the workshop today. If there are any further questions, do feel free to, for instance, you can send questions in the convening chat, you can message me personally on Discord, and I will be happy to answer them. With that said, I hope that you all have a wonderful evening. And now I'm going to turn it over to Miggy, who will give some technical stuff. Go, Miggy.
Thank you, Scott. So now we're just gonna move on to the general briefing on the debate platform itself. We're going to be using Tabra as standard for Philippine debates. So allow me to share my screen. Okay. So for Stellar Forum, we'll be using Tabr. So what exactly is Tabr? Tabr is basically a debate platform online that's used as standard in Philippine debates. And it essentially computes everything that is needed, all the data in a debate. Say, for example, adjudication ballots or any of your debater ballots. It takes note of all of that. It computes all the rankings and it computes the breaks as well. So I got a question earlier on how breaks will be computed and how many teams are participating. So this is how each of the breaks will be computed. So joining the tournament entails joining Tabber, right? You need to make a Tabber account through the website tabbr.co. If you go there, you can make an account. And as of now, the tournament Stellar Forum is not yet published. We will be publishing it tomorrow morning. So once you make your Tabber account, you can log in to your Tabber account and go to the homepage. Again, it's just tabbr.co and choose the option Asian Parliamentary. Now, after choosing the option, you need to go to the search bar and search the tournament name. This is generally how you find any tournament on Tabber. So the tournament for this one is Stellar Forum, and select the tournament hosted by University of Asia in the Pacific. So next thing you have to do is once you're in the Stellar Forum homepage or the dashboard, you go to the home tab and select are you a participant. So it will give you an option to do that. Uh, Signing into Tabber is separate from signing into the tournament itself. So you have to do that both things first. So after signing in and going into the dashboard, you can choose the option Are you a participant? Don't worry, I'll give you a visual guide later on how it will look like. So choose the option Are you a participant and choose the team that you registered as and confirm and enter the password. Now for the passwords, we will be giving you these passwords by tonight, hopefully, or either tonight or tomorrow morning through your HR contact persons. So each team already is in contact with a human resource person, and they will be sending your passwords through there. So for what it looks like, this is Tabber's homepage, tabbr.co. You're gonna see this. And if you don't have an account, instead of the My Tournaments you see there, it's gonna give you the option to sign in. So once you're signed in, you will be directed to this page. So choose Asian Parliamentary, and you can see this. You can look up Tabber Stellar Forum as a tournament and look for the one hosted by the University of Asia in the Pacific. Now, once you click that, you'll be moved to this homepage, the dashboard. And this is what I was saying when I was saying choose the Are you participant option. So that will allow you to sign in either as a team of debaters or as an adjudicator. So obviously for adjudicators, we're in contact with them. We'll choose the adjudicator option, and for you debaters, choose the team option. And once you select the team that you're in registered as, it'll give you a drop down menu to choose. Confirm that, and you should be able to log in. Now, as here, once you confirm that, it'll prompt you to give the password. So as I said, the passwords will be sent through the HR contact person, and you can input it here in this prompt message. So once you're done with that, it will bring you to this tab. So the basics of Tabber revolves around this one button for debaters, adjudicators, and administrators. This one button called the control panel. This is basically where you're gonna have to input your scores, do vetoing, looking at the motions, looking at the matchups. So this button can be found on the lower right hand corner of your screen. And if you click it, you will be given the following options. So let's explore that a little bit. So in the dashboard, you can see in the home tab what rounds are happening right now. And if you click the control panel, you will be given this panel. So as you can see, you have the following options. The conflicts are already arranged, but if ever you have conflicts with any other team or any adjudicator, you can submit your conflicts through there. The rounds that are published will be seen through this control panel. Say, for example, if you look at the example on screen, round one is published, so debaters are able to see. So the next option is matchups. So you can view your matchups, which is basically what room you're in, what motions there are available to veto, and how much time you have left for preparations. You can also view through this who exactly your adjudicators will be. So this includes the chair of the room and the panelists. So the next three options are the most important ones. So Scott already explained the structure of the debate, so you guys should be familiar with what the following three options. So the first option is vetoes. So how do you veto? Once you click the veto option with the graph as an icon, you'll be led to this tab. So, say for example, in each round there will be three motions since it's Asian parliamentary. So, say for example, motion A, motion B, and motion C. You will be given the option to tap either one of these for the first and second and third priority. So this is what it will look like. So if you tap the first thing you tap, you'll give it the first priority. So that's the motion, as Scott explained a while ago, that you want to debate on the most. And the second thing you tap will be second priority. Thing you tap will be third priority or the last priority. So you can tap them in any order according to your preference or according to what you've discussed with your team. So this is how you're going to be vetoing your motions. And Tabber will be calculating on both ends for your side and the opposition side which motion will be debated on. So say for example, motion A, motion B, and motion C. You guys voted 1, 2, 3 as your priority, and the opposition voted 2, 1, 3. So obviously Taber's gonna flip a coin between motion A and motion B, considering motion C is the one both sides are don't want to debate on the most. So after doing that, you need to confirm your vetoes just to be sure. If it's in the wrong order, you can go back and reorganize it. So after you're confirming, it gives you another confirm option and you will be able to submit it. So once you've submitted it, you're gonna have to wait for your opponents to see your opponent's veto to see what motion you will be debating on, and then you can begin the round. So word of or another note is that as Scott said a while ago, the veto timing or the submission of vetoes is already included in the 30 minutes of prep time. So the longer you take in veto, the less time you'll have to prepare for the round itself. Okay, so next option in the three options, we have speaker position. Scott already explained what each of these are. In Tabra, you just have to assign each position to each of your members. So once you click the speaker position option, you will be guided to this panel. So as you can see, it'll give you the option. So say, for example, your opposition in this case. And again, the Tabber will assign you either government or opposition once the round is published. And the matchups will be sent through Discord anyway. So say, for example, your opposition, you will be given the option to assign which members of your team are taking which roles of opposition. So for say, for example, leader of opposition, which is the first speaker of opposition, deputy leader of opposition is the second speaker for opposition, and opposition whip is your whip or your third speaker, and opposition reply. Now take note, the reply speaker cannot be the whip speaker as the whip speaker just spoke. So the reply speaker has to either be the first or second speaker. So you can assign these one by one, and once you're done assigning it, you have to confirm it and submit. Now, once these are submitted, you can proceed and with the round. So the third option among the three options should be done after the round itself has been completed. So submitting feedback, this is basically submitting your feedback regarding the decision of your chair or your panelists. So you're basically gonna be grading the adjudicators that judged your round. This also factors into how the adjudicators will break or which rooms they will be placed in. So for round feedback, if you choose the round feedback option, you'll be guided to this panel, and you can enter the score that you want to give for your panelist or your chair. So say for example your chair is Natasha Romanov, you can give a score from of with a range of 1 to 10. Take note that a score of 1 means that the adjudicator gave a very illogical or an oral adjudication that did not make sense and had no reason in it. And you're basically saying that this ad shouldn't be in any room at all for the next round. So score range from 1 through 10. Generally, if the ad had logic and had reason in the oral adjudication, or it made sense, even though you didn't win, you generally want to give them a higher range of scores. So the range of scores will be explained tomorrow again with the technicality briefings and what each range means. So what a 1 means and what a 10 means and what every other number in between that means. So after giving that, you can give your feedback through words and then you can submit it. So say for example, your address to godlike, they gave a really good oral adjudication, you're gonna give them a 10. So after that, you have to confirm your submission and then it'll be submitted. So that's the last thing that you need to consider in your control panel. So next thing we'll be discussing is the side panel, or the thing that you can see on the left-hand side with tab and every other option that you can see. So in this side panel, you can see the home tab. So in the home tab, it shows you whatever is happening currently in the tournament. So say for example, round 1 was published. You'll see the preparation time of round 1, the prep time you have left, the motions that have been published, and other information like matchups and um, tabs and like that and the like. So after that is the motions. So after this, these here in this panel, you can find the motions that have been published. So if the motions haven't been published, you won't be able to see it. Like take for example, if you look down there at round 2, it says no motions. That basically means that the administrator has not yet published the motions. Basically means round 2 has not yet begun. So after this is the break calculator. So this is what I was saying a while ago. All scores and ballots that will be factored in into this calculator, which Tabber basically does it automatically. So breaking is a concept in debate, which basically means you're eligible for the break rounds or the finals, semifinals, quarterfinals. In the case of Stellar Forum, given the participant base, we'll be having semifinals and finals. So if you are eligible to proceed to the break rounds, that means you have broken. And this can be calculated by Tabber automatically once all the ballots and scores have been taken into account. So take note that after each round you have to submit your feedback. It's not an option not to, because we won't be able to proceed to the next round without you submitting it. Similarly, the adjudicators will also have to submit their feedback on how the round went, which team won, and what the scores of each speaker are. And if not, we won't be able to proceed to the next round. So after this is the tabs. Tabs are basically the scores, the score range, or whatever you guys submitted for the adjudicators. That's not necessarily important on your end. The next one are team breaks. This is basically the breaks whoever broke in the categories or the break rounds. And the break rounds for Stellar Forum will be semifinals and finals. So the next one is just general information of who is in the tournament itself. You have the participating institutions, participating teams, participating debaters, and adjudicators, as well as the venues. Now, for the venues, these venues are parallel to what you can see on Discord. So if you look at the Discord, you can see there are various categories, namely ACB 101 through 110. So these are the rooms that you'll be debating in, and it has corresponding text channels and other rooms where you can do your preps in. So for the venues, you will see that the names will be parallel to what is seen on Discord. Say, for example, ACB 102, ACB 107, so that you guys know where you will go for each round. So that's all for the technical briefing on Tabber. Does anyone have any questions or clarifications they want to raise?
Sir,
Yes.
Regarding the registration of the Tabra account, is it done individually or as a team?
For Tabber accounts, it's done individually, as well as going into the tournament itself. You need individual Tabber accounts in order to access the tournament. Okay. Does anyone else have any questions or clarifications for Tabber? Okay. Going once, going twice.
Hello, sir. Good evening.
Yes. Good
I-
evening.
Hello, is it okay to do manual veto on the chat box in the debate room if ever Tapper lags off? Because based on our previous tournaments, like um Tabber sometimes lag off, like it doesn't notify us anything. So is it okay to drop our veto points on the group and on the chat box of the debate room?
Okay. In cases like those, where Tabber does malfunction, that's gonna be a problem because for the rounds itself, you're gonna have to go through the process of vetoing. But in the extreme cases that does happen, we're gonna allow that you can veto, but you have to present the veto through the room chat box so that everyone else can see and so that the adges can see and so that the adge in the room can do a coin flip if necessary.
Okay, thanks.
No problem. Does anyone else have any questions or clarifications regarding Tabor as a whole or going about it? Okay, I'll proceed to some general reminders or final notes. This is for the tournament as a whole. So first things first, coaches may join as observers. So coaches, what I mean by this is those that have teams that are already participating in the tournament itself, coaches, trainers, or captains. They may join as observers only. Second, personal comments after the round from either the chair or the panelists should be requested through Discord direct messages to avoid further delays. So in debate tournaments after rounds. It's generally known that you can ask for personal comments so that the Edge can give you comments to improve how your like lines of argumentation or generally how you debate. But for this Stellar Forum tournament, we want personal comments to be directed through direct messages so that we avoid further delays in the program flow. So instead of going into a different voice channel asking for personal comments there, kindly ask it through direct messages so the adjudicators can type it out for you. So thirdly, equity forms will be available in the announcements text channel on Discord. I believe that is found in the welcome category. So for equity, this you guys will be briefed on this tomorrow as well by Adcore, care of Adcore. So fourth thing, Tabber passcodes will be sent to your respective HR contact people, as I've said, before the tournament starts. So if no one else has any questions, we can end this workshop.
Sir,
Excuse me.
Yes,
last
go ahead.
question po. Where does the debate proper gonna happen through Tabber also?
So for Tabor and Discord, we're going to be having the round proper in Discord. And Tabor is basically going to be used for the functions of a debate. So vetoing motions, assigning speaker roles, and the general computations. So Tabor isn't necessarily,
Okay, thank you.
Tabor isn't necessarily a platform where you can speak and where you can type things. It's just a general utility website that debate tournaments use. So yeah, just to clarify, Discord will be used for rounds themselves.
Hello. Good evening.
Hello.
Yes po. With regards to the proceedings of the debate, once the motion has been given to the debaters, they will be given a preparation time. Am I right?
Yes. So once the MCs announce the motions and the theme for the debate, We will start the preparation times once the matchups have been released. So matchups are basically who you'll be going up against and what adjudicator will be in your room, where you will be in Discord. So once all that information has been released, we will be starting the 30-minute timer. And again, vetoing is included in that 30-minute timer.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Excuse me, po, sir.
Yes,
Um, uh, can I ask something about the technicality of the debate itself?
go ahead.
Are we required to open our cameras, even though there may be a possibility of lagging due to open opening of cameras?
Okay, for cameras, it's not mandatory that you open your cameras, although we do encourage it. If you're not able to, if your internet bandwidth is not able to handle that, it's not required that you open your cameras. What's important is that obviously you're gonna unmute and give your speech. Okay. Does anyone else have any questions or clarifications? Anything regarding the debate tournament or Tabber or even Discord? Okay, going once, going twice. Okay, so if no one has any further questions, or if you have questions that you think of after this, feel free to email sabio@uhab.asia, or direct your questions to your contact persons, HR contact persons, so that we can get back to you immediately. So we're gonna call this workshop to a close. Thank you very much for attending, and good luck tomorrow.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.